Everyone told you that being alone was the problem, that the goal was to fill the space, fill the calendar, fill the silence, fill every quiet moment with people, noise and activity until the aloneness could not find a place to land. Because somewhere along the way the world decided that alone meant lonely, that silence meant something was wrong, that the person sitting by themselves in a restaurant or taking a walk without headphones or choosing a quiet evening over a crowded room was someone to feel sorry for, someone who had not figured out the social part yet, someone who was missing something that everyone else seemed to have. And maybe you believed that for a long time. Maybe you filled the space too. You said yes to things you did not want to do. You stayed in rooms that drained you because leaving felt like admitting something. You kept yourself constantly surrounded, not because the surrounding felt good, but because the alternative felt like failure. And underneath all of it, underneath all the noise and the plans and the carefully filled calendar, there was something waiting, something that only surfaces in the quiet, something that the noise was keeping you from, yourself. And today we are going to talk about why finding yourself in the silence is not the consolation prize for people who could not figure out how to be surrounded. It is the whole point. Before we get into why being alone makes you stronger, I want to tell you something about the men who understood this most completely. Marcus Aurelius was surrounded every single day of his adult life by armies, by senators, by advisors, generals, and the constant demanding presence of an empire that never stopped needing something from him. He was never physically alone, and yet he found a way to be profoundly alone inside all of that. He carved out a space, a private interior space where none of the noise could reach, where he could think clearly, where he could examine himself honestly, where he could return to who he was before the empire got to him every morning. He called it retiring into himself. And he considered it the most important thing he did, not the governance, not the military campaigns, not the political decisions that shaped an empire, the retiring into himself. Seneca, who spent years in exile, physically alone in a way that most people would have experienced as punishment, discovered something in that solitude that he could not have found anywhere else. He wrote about it in letters that remain among the most honest documents in human history. He wrote, "I am never less alone than when I am alone." Think about that sentence. Never less alone than when alone. The most alive, the most present, the most genuinely connected to himself in the moments when nobody else was there. And Epictetus, who had spent his early life as a slave with no physical freedom whatsoever, built an entire philosophy around the idea that the inner world, the world available to you in solitude, was the only world that was truly free. These were not men who could not find people. These were men who had found something more valuable. And today, that is exactly what we are going to find together. The first reason being alone makes you stronger is that solitude is where you find out who you actually are, not who you are in the presence of other people. In the presence of other people, you are always performing some version of yourself, not dishonestly, not with bad intentions, but inevitably, because other people create a context. A social context that shapes how you present, what you emphasize, what you suppress, which version of yourself you bring to the front, and which parts you tuck away because this particular audience does not need to see them. And over time, with enough audiences, enough performances, enough social context to navigate, you can lose track of which version is the real one. You start to confuse the performance with the person. And solitude, real solitude, is the only place where the audience disappears completely, where there is no one to perform for, where the social mask comes off, not because you ripped it off dramatically, but because there is no one there to wear it for. And what is left after the performance ends, after the audience leaves, after the noise dies down, is the most honest version of yourself you will ever encounter. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig." He was not being poetic, he was being precise. The good, the real self, the genuine values and instincts and understanding are not found in the crowd, they are found in the quiet. By digging, by sitting with yourself long enough without distraction, without the noise that fills every gap, to actually hear what is underneath. Most people never do this. They spend their entire lives surrounded and arrive at old age having been in the constant company of others, while remaining almost completely unknown to themselves. Do not let that be you. The solitude is not the empty time. It is the excavation time. And what you find when you dig is worth more than anything the crowd could give you. The second reason is that alone is where your thoughts become yours. In the company of others, your thoughts are always in conversation with something external, a comment someone made, an opinion you heard, a perspective that arrived from outside and installed itself inside so naturally that it started to feel like your own thinking, even though it was not. And this is not a modern problem. Marcus Aurelius wrote about it 2,000 years ago. He was surrounded by advisors, men with agendas, men with opinions about how he should govern, how he should think, what he should value, and he had to work constantly to distinguish his own thinking from the thinking that had been placed inside him by people with reasons to put it there. Solitude was how he did that work. In the quiet, in the journal, in the space where nobody else's voice could interrupt, he could finally hear what he actually thought, not what he had been told. Not what was convenient, not what the people around him needed him to believe, what he actually thought. And for you, in a world that is more saturated with other people's thinking than any world that has ever existed, this work is more urgent than it has ever been. Every hour you spend consuming other people's opinions, other people's takes, other people's version of what the world is and what it means and what you should care about, is an hour your own thinking did not get to develop, your own conclusions did not get to form, your own voice did not get to be heard, even by you. Solitude is where you turn off the incoming signal. And finally, for the first time in perhaps a very long time, you hear what is actually playing on your own frequency. And what you find there is often more interesting, more honest, more genuinely you than anything you absorb from the outside. The third reason is that alone is where you build the relationship that determines every other relationship in your life, the relationship with yourself. And most people have a terrible relationship with themselves, not because they are bad people, because they have never spent enough time alone to build one. The relationship with yourself, like every other relationship, requires time, attention, honesty, the willingness to sit with someone, in this case yourself, even when the sitting is uncomfortable, even when what comes up in the quiet is not flattering, even when the honest version of yourself, the one that only surfaces when the audience is gone, is someone you are still learning how to be with. Most people run from that. They fill the quiet with noise, not because they love the noise, but because the quiet means meeting themselves. And meeting yourself fully, honestly, without the social mask, is genuinely uncomfortable until it becomes genuinely valuable. Epictetus said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." The why is found inside, not in the crowd. The crowd will give you their why. They will give you their version of what makes a life worth living, their values, their measurements of success, their definition of what you should be building. And if you have not spent enough time alone to find your own, you will live their why for your entire life and arrive somewhere that made perfect sense to them and no sense at all to you. The time you spend alone building the relationship with yourself, finding your own why, is not time away from your life. It is the time your life is actually built in. The fourth reason is that solitude sharpens every mental faculty you have. Think about the last time you did your best thinking. Really, your clearest, your most original, your most honest thinking. Was it in a meeting with 12 other people all speaking at once? Was it in the middle of a conversation where you were simultaneously trying to listen and formulate a response? Was it at a party, or in a group chat, or in the middle of any social environment where the primary demand on your mind was interpersonal rather than intellectual? Almost certainly not. Your best thinking, the thinking that actually moves something forward, happens somewhere quiet, on a walk, in the shower, at a desk in an empty room. In the space between sleep and waking, when the mind is loose and associative and free from the social demands that structure every other waking moment. This is not accidental. The mind does its best work in solitude, not because people are bad for the mind, but because the presence of others activates a different cognitive mode, the social mode, the mode concerned with impression management, emotional attunement, and the constant low-level processing of what others are thinking and feeling and needing. That mode is essential, but it is not the mode that produces insight. Insight happens in the other mode, the one that is only available when the social demands go quiet, when you are not managing how you appear, when you are not navigating someone else's emotional landscape, when your mind is free to move in whatever direction it wants to move, following the thread of its own curiosity without interruption, without the constant redirection that other people's presence creates. Marcus Aurelius did his most important thinking alone, in the journal, in the quiet hours, in the interior space that the empire could not enter, and the thinking he did there, the meditations, has shaped human civilization for 2,000 years, not the governance, not the military campaigns, the thinking done alone, in the quiet, that nobody was supposed to read. What thinking might you do if you gave yourself more of that quiet? The fifth reason is that being alone teaches you that you are enough. And most people are terrified of learning this, not because they do not want it to be true, because if it is true, then every conversation they used to fill, every plan they made just to avoid the quiet, every room they stayed in past the point where it felt right was unnecessary. And there is something in human beings, something that resists the discovery that the thing they were running from was never actually dangerous. But here is what happens when you spend genuine time alone, not the uncomfortable first 10 minutes, not the initial restlessness that arrives when the noise stops and the mind does not know what to do with itself. Past that, into the actual quiet on the other side of the restlessness, what you find there is not emptiness, it is presence, your own presence, full and real and more than sufficient. The anxiety that other people's company was suppressing starts to settle, not because you fixed anything, but because the quiet, the genuine, undistracted quiet, has a way of returning you to yourself. And yourself, it turns out, is not the threatening thing you spent all that time running from. Seneca wrote, "Recede into ips, retreat into yourself." But he was not telling you to hide. He was telling you to go home, because the home, the genuine interior home where everything you need already lives, is only accessible in the quiet. And the person who has found that home, who has sat in it long enough to know it is real, never needs the noise in quite the same way again. Not because they stop loving people, but because they stop needing the people to make the quiet bearable. The quiet is not the problem. The quiet, it turns out, has been the destination all along. The sixth reason is that solitude is where you process everything the world throws at you. Think about what happens in a normal day, not an unusual day, a normal one. You encounter dozens of people, dozens of situations, dozens of small interactions that carry emotional weight, most of it unprocessed. A comment from a colleague that landed strangely. A moment in a conversation where something shifted, a decision you made that you have not examined, a feeling that arrived and has not been addressed. And most people, because they move immediately from one social context to another, never process any of it. It just accumulates, the unprocessed moments, the unexamined feelings, the things that arrived and were tucked away because there was no time, no space, no quiet in which to actually look at them, until eventually the weight of all those unprocessed moments becomes something else. Anxiety that does not have a clear source. Irritability that seems disproportionate to whatever triggered it. A general low-level exhaustion that is not physical, because it was never about the physical effort. It is about the emotional accumulation of a life that never stopped long enough to process what was happening inside it. Marcus Aurelius used the journal for this. Every evening in the quiet he went back through the day, not to judge it, not to celebrate it, to process it, to look at what happened clearly, honestly, and to extract from it what was useful, what could be learned, what needed to be addressed, and what could be released. The processing work that most people never do, because they never create the solitude in which to do it. Give yourself the quiet, not as a luxury, as maintenance, as the essential ongoing work of being a human being who is paying attention to their own life. Every significant decision you have ever made or will ever make deserves the quality of attention that only solitude provides, because decisions made in social contexts are always contaminated by social considerations. What will people think? What does this person need me to say? What is the version of this choice that makes me look the way I want to look? None of those are the right question. The right question is, what do I actually want here? What do my values actually indicate? What does the quiet, honest part of me, the part that is not performing for anyone, say about this? And that part only speaks in the quiet, in the absence of other people's expectations, in the space where you are accountable only to yourself and to the values you have established in the solitude, in the excavation work, in the relationship with yourself, that only solitude makes possible. Epictetus taught that the only freedom is the freedom to choose, and the only genuine choice is the one made from your own values without contamination from external pressure. Solitude is where that choice lives, where you can hear what you actually want apart from what you have been told you should want, apart from what would be convenient for others, apart from what the social context is pressuring you toward. The big decisions of your life, the ones about who to be with, what to build, where to go, what to give your finite time to, deserve the quality of attention that only the quiet can give them. Make them there, not in the noise, in the quiet, where the real answer lives. The eighth reason is that solitude builds the kind of resilience that nothing else can. Because resilience is not built in comfortable conditions. It is built in the moment when you are alone, genuinely alone, with something hard, with a feeling that is uncomfortable, with a silence that asks something of you, with the version of yourself that arrives when all external support is removed, and you have to find out, without the comfort of other people's presence, whether you are enough to meet this moment alone, and you are, every time. But you do not know that with the kind of certainty that only comes from evidence until you have been alone with the hard thing and discovered that you survived it, that the fear was bigger than the reality, that the silence was not the threat, that you, just you without the noise, were more than sufficient. Seneca wrote, "Per aspera ad astra," through hardship to the stars, and one of the hardest things for a world that has made it easier than ever to avoid being alone is to sit with the silence, to not immediately fill it, to let it ask its question and to wait long enough to hear your own answer. That waiting, that willingness to be alone with the hard thing until you discover you can handle it, is the foundation of every other form of resilience. Because the person who knows they can sit with themselves in silence knows something about their own capacity that most people never get to discover. They know they do not need the noise to be okay, and that knowledge, that specific quiet knowledge, makes everything else more manageable. Not because the hard things get easier, but because you get more certain through evidence that you are capable of meeting them. The ninth reason is that in solitude you develop a standard for other people that you could never develop in the noise. This is the one that changes everything about your relationships, because most people who never spend genuine time alone never develop a clear sense of what good company actually feels like. They have nothing to compare it to. Every conversation feels roughly equivalent. Every person who wants to be in their space is welcomed, not because the company is genuinely nourishing, but because the alternative is the silence, and the silence feels worse. But the person who has spent genuine time in solitude, who has sat with themselves long enough to know what that feels like, who has experienced the quality of their own presence, the honesty of it, the depth of it, the peace of it, starts to measure everything else against that standard. And they become, without becoming cold or antisocial, much more selective. Not because they like people less, because they like themselves enough to protect the quality of their own interior life from people who do not add to it. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this constantly, about choosing carefully, about associating with people who improve you, about protecting the inner world from the people who would disturb it without knowing or knowing and not caring. You cannot develop that discernment, that genuine, precise discernment, without a reference point. And the reference point is the experience of being alone, and genuinely okay. Once you know what that feels like, you know what you are protecting. And the people who get access to you get access to someone who is fully present with them, because they are not there out of fear of the quiet. They are there because they chose it, and chosen presence is the only kind that actually means anything. The 10th reason is that being alone is where you build the version of yourself that is worth being around. This is the one that ties everything together, because here is the paradox at the heart of all of this. The more time you spend genuinely alone, building the relationship with yourself, finding your own thinking, processing what arrives, making decisions from your own values, building resilience in the quiet, developing the standard, the more valuable your presence becomes to other people. Not because you performed for them, because you became someone with a genuine interior life, someone who has done the work quietly, privately, without an audience, to figure out who they actually are and what they actually stand for. And that person, the person who has been forged in the solitude, is fundamentally different in every room they enter. Not louder, not more impressive, just more real, more present, more genuinely themselves. And realness, true realness, is the rarest and most magnetic quality available to a human being. Seneca wrote, "Dum differtur vita transcurrit." While we delay, life passes. Do not delay the solitude. Do not wait until you have processed the fear of it. Do not wait until the calendar clears and the conditions are perfect and the world gives you a quiet moment. Create it deliberately, protect it fiercely. Return to it the way Marcus Aurelius returned to the journal, the way Seneca returned to the letters, the way Epictetus returned to the philosophy that kept him free inside the chains, again and again. Not because the world will ever stop asking for your attention. It will not. But because the you that meets the world after the solitude is a completely different person from the one who never went there. More grounded, more certain, more at peace, more capable, more genuinely present with everyone who matters, more free. So here is the truth underneath all of this. Being alone is not the absence of something, it is the presence of something, the presence of yourself, your actual self, the one that only shows up when the noise stops. The one that has been waiting quietly, patiently, underneath all the filling and the surrounding and the noise for you to finally sit down, be quiet and listen. Marcus Aurelius sat down in the middle of an empire, surrounded by more people and more noise than most people encounter in a lifetime. And he found the quiet inside all of that, every single day, and what he wrote there in that quiet changed the world, not because he was extraordinary, because he was honest with himself in the silence that is available to you right now, not after the calendar clears, not when the world gets quieter, right now. In whatever quiet you can carve from whatever noise surrounds you, start there, stay there, return there, and discover what Marcus Aurelius discovered, and Seneca, and Epictetus, and every human being who has ever had the courage to sit with themselves long enough to hear the answer, that you were never incomplete, you were just too noisy to notice. Marcus Aurelius wrote one final thing I want to leave you with, not in the middle of a great victory, not after a resolution. In the middle of everything, he wrote, "Perfection of character is this, to live each day as if it were your last, without frenzy, without apathy, without pretense, not performing for the world, not filling the silence out of fear, not surrounding yourself as proof that you are enough, If this said something that needed to be said, share it with someone who needs to hear that being alone is not the problem. It might be the solution. Subscribe for new Stoic wisdom here every single week.